Welcome to Wining and Dining with Gina Birch. It's a series where we dive into the experience of food and wine. We learn the stories behind those who create and cultivate both, and we have a little bit of fun along the way. So today I'm super excited to have a good friend of mine and a great winemaker in the studio, Clay Mauritson. He's founder of Mauritson's Wines in Sonoma, California. Has sixth generation in a family of grape growers. And if you have not had his wines or heard his story, you are in for a treat. Clay, I'm so happy to have you in the studio this morning. Good to see you.
It is awesome to be back.
Yeah, it's been a minute since you've been in Florida, huh?
Almost exactly a year, actually.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think last time I saw you, besides when you were in Florida, it was a couple of years ago, I went to your winery.
Yep.
We had a trip. It was right when you were getting ready to do Project Zen again, which I'm going to give you plenty of opportunity to tell everybody about because I think it's so cool.
You get 21 of the best zinfandel producers in the world, some of the greatest chefs in California and beyond that come together to raise money for a great cause.
Right.
And it's kind of what the wine industry is all about.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And we're all about food and wine here. So you have a really inspiring story of success. You're kind of the black sheep of the family, and you kind of went out and did some things on your own and returned kind of like the prodigal son. For people who don't know your story, why don't you go ahead and tell everybody?
Yeah. I think our family story is one of the phoenix rising from the ashes in multiple circumstances. We have an amazing history. We are one of the oldest farming families in all of California. We've been there since the 1860s when we homesteaded our first piece of property and have farmed that same piece of property contiguously since then, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. But it hasn't been without its trials and tribulations. We lost almost everything we had in 1968, 100 years after homesteading the property, because the Army Corps of Engineers decided that they wanted to build a lake, which today is Lake Sonoma. Truly, the reason for building the lake was what eminent domain should be about for the good of the greater community. But typical of eminent domain, my family was not compensated fairly. We were paid about 8 cents on the dollar.
Wow.
And literally, we lost everything of value. We lost my grandparents' home, my great-grandparents' home, 600 acres of vines and orchards that we were farming, as well as all of the land that we were raising sheep and cattle on.
Wow.
And we forget that, the wine industry in California has been, extremely successful, and it's a very important on the world scene, but it's also relatively young. Up until that point, our major source of income for our family was raising livestock. And so that was all taken away by the stroke of a pen, and we literally had to start from scratch in 1968. I joke that my brothers and I started to come along around that time frame and spent the majority of our childhood like indentured servants. My parents definitely believe that the more kids you had, the cheaper the labor force was. Right. I think a lot of Americans that are small business owners can identify with that.
Yeah, for sure.
And as you said, I am without a doubt the black sheep of the family. All my brothers went off and got viticulture degrees with the sole intention of coming back and working in the family business. And I tried extremely hard to get away from the business. Went to college to play football, majored in marketing, minored in finance, nothing to do with wine. And really the only way to sum it up is sometimes in life we just don't know what we have till it's gone. And obviously that applies to a lot of different aspects of life. But for me, perspective is an amazing thing. And I think as a teenager, it's pretty hard to have life perspective.
Yeah.
But I just had no understanding of what an amazing place Sonoma County was to be born and raised. Very little appreciation for how incredible my family's history was. Certainly in the United States, I guess if you go to the old world, they'll laugh at you when you say you're a sixth-generation grape grower. That means you're just getting started.
Right.
But in California, that's a pretty amazing history. And so for the first time in my life, I did have this desire to come back to Sonoma County to be a part of, what my family was doing. But I needed to find my own path.
Right.
I knew that just my personality, my dad's personality, wouldn't mesh in a working relationship. So I kind of stumbled into a job in winemaking, decided that I really loved that side of the industry. So I went back to school. UC Davis was offering a certificate program in winemaking at the time, which was wonderful for me because it allowed me to continue working at the winery I was at. So had a chance to work with some amazing winemakers in California and started looking around going, what in the hell is my family doing? We own some of the best vineyards in Sonoma County, which is not a statement I take lightly. I mean, because if you believe in that, which I absolutely do, that means you own some of the best vineyards in the world.
Yeah.
And we were selling all this fruit to other wineries. And the wineries I was working at were all purchasing fruit from my family And, our Cabernet is making it into the reserve blend. Our Sauvignon Blanc was constantly graded as one of the top Sauvignon Blancs. And I'm going home and I'm telling my dad this information. And he's like, are you kidding me? They just tried to cut my grape contract. And so that was really the spark for the idea of, what are we doing? Why are we selling all this fruit to other wineries?
Right.
We should be making our own wines. And, when I first presented the idea to my family, they thought I was completely nuts, just reaffirming my place as the black sheep of the family. But, without going into all the gory details, the consolidation that was happening in the mid-1990s really shed a light on how important it was for us to control at least some of our own destiny. And so 27 years ago, can you believe that? 27 years ago,
long.
My parents agreed to sell me some grapes, and we started making our first ever wines from our vineyards.
Yeah. For a lot of people don't understand, sometimes there is this contentious thing between the growers and the producers. It's kind of like in my business and radio, you have the people who are, quote, the talent, and then you have the salespeople.
Yeah.
And everyone's angling for the same thing, but there's not always that cohesive, because everybody wants their little piece further.
It's an antagonistic relationship just because it's finances are on the line, right?
Exactly.
A farmer, and I don't care if you're farming wheat, corn, soy, grapes, oranges, citrus, you name it. You want to maximize the profitability of an acre of land. And as a grower, the way you do that is you maximize yields.
Yeah.
Well, wineries, they want lower yields because the quality is higher, but they don't necessarily want to compensate the grower for that. And so I think that's the root of the problem, and that's no different than any other business, like you said. We have found ways to circumnavigate that as a family. I don't pay my brothers, who now run the vineyard side of it, by the ton for anything, which is really rare in California. We pay for everything by the acre. Because if I take the incentive away for them to grow higher yields, because I'm guaranteeing them a specific price for the acre of land, whether they get 1 ton or 5 tons from it,
Right.
then their only mission is to grow the highest quality, because they have basically a guaranteed income on it. And so that
Makes
has
sense.
not only made our family dinners a little bit more comfortable and less contentious, but it helps us to produce absolutely spectacular wines, and it makes sure that we have each other's best interest in mind.
Well, we have some wine in front of us, so let's go ahead and talk about this one. And just for, what do you want to say, letting everyone know, full disclosure, that I have a lot of Clay's wine in my house because I've always been a fan. And this one is, I think it's a 2021 Rockpile Zen.
Yes.
And this is, the Rockpile is kind of one of your flagship vineyards, and it's a very special piece of land in Sonoma. It goes back to the lake thing.
Without a doubt. And I always joke with people, you have to take everything I say about it with a grain of salt, because I'm very biased. When life hands you lemonades, lemons, sometimes people tell you to make lemonade. In my life, I say, let's make limoncello out of that, right? When we lost the property to eminent domain, it was devastating. There was no way to sugarcoat it. But the silver lining in that is that when the Army Corps of Engineers built the dam to create Lake Sonoma, inadvertently, that lake created the Rockpile appellation. And you truly have one of the most distinctive places in the world to grow grapes, because not only is the appellation essentially a peninsula that's surrounded on 3 sides by the lake, but Lake Sonoma is 250 feet deep. So it's an extremely cold body of water. And when you have cold water and warm air, that creates an inversion layer. And so not only do you have this very moderate climate with all the great attributes of any other hillside environment, but you have that without moisture in the form of fog. And we joke all the time, it's almost like cheating. I mean, it is just such a spectacular place to grow grapes. And for my family, again, we've owned this land for 157 years. So it is such a integral part to our DNA, to who we are. But it also happens to produce some of the best grapes coming out of California.
I tell you, this wine just smells gorgeous.
It is. I mean, there's, I think at the core of it, I could talk about inversion layers and soil composition and all that. But what I try to explain to people is, how do you taste that in the wine? How do you taste those nuances in the wine? And, for me, on a winemaking perspective, we get physiologic and phenolic maturity at relatively lower sugar levels.
Yeah.
It is that simple. And when you can pick grapes at a true sugar level of 24 brix, which basically means 24% sugar, acid and sugar are a converse relationship. So the lower your sugar levels are when you pick, the higher your acids are. And so I think that's one of the fundamental differences in this wine is when you smell it, you don't smell dried fruit. You don't smell jammy notes. There's no monochromatic flavor profile. You have beautiful fruit that's high tone because it has acid, but there's herb, there's mineral.
I smell some great herbs in this.
It's just
like I'm in a field almost.
It is. And you don't think about that with Zinfandel. Unfortunately, I think Zin has gotten an unfair, bad rap, and people think of it as this kind of jammy fruit bomb, right? A popsicle wine. Mm-hmm. And when you grow it impeccably in the perfect location, you can make Zinfandel that is complex or structured as any great wine in the world.
I'm glad you brought that up because that was one of the things I think Zin is misunderstood. It's underappreciated because of what you said. We've had a lot of the big jammy fruit bombs that are high in sugar and high in alcohol, and they're just not balanced.
They're not.
But this is just a beautiful wine.
And you hit the nail on the head. For a wine to be considered great, it has to have balance. And balance doesn't always have to do with alcohol. Balance can be, a wine can have too much acid. It can have too little acid. It can be too high in alcohol. It can be too low in alcohol. It can have too much tannin. And that's the beauty of wine is you have all these things working in concert. The people, I often use cooking analogies in talking about wine, but I've heard other great winemakers use music analogies in talking about wine and how you bring in the horns versus the strings and the bass and how all those things working in concert are what make a beautiful song, what make a beautiful, sound, but it's also what makes a beautiful wine is taking all those components and making sure that they're complementing each other, that no one thing is dominating the palate.
Right. This has some savory notes. It's got, like you said, really nice acid. I could think of this with all kinds of food, game, lamb, any kind of fatty meat, pork.
That's what I love. I love, and you hit the nail on the head, fatty meat. And, to me, well marbled is how I think of it. If I'm going to pair it with beef, something like a short rib, that does have a lot of fat. Anything that you're going to braise or barbecue, I love with this. But I'm a hunter, and so I love game. And, that's kind of the dichotomy, right, is game is usually extremely lean. And so I actually love, upland game with this. So pheasant, quail. So think about squab if you're eating domestically, right, or eating, for something that's, farm raised. To me, that fat, like a duck breast, because there's so much flavor, in that. But the herbal notes, the mineral notes do go so well with game.
You specialize. You have a lot of different wines, but one of your specialties is Zin.
Yes,
and Old Vine Zin. So I remember I heard you say once, I bleed Old Vine Zin. Like if you cut my veins, I'd be bleeding out the Old Vine Zinfandel. I
am an insanely competitive person. Some people would joke that in order to be a Zinfandel producer, you almost have to be masochistic. I joke with my Pinot Noir brethren that anyone who's ever tried to tell you that Pinot is the most difficult wine to make has simply never made Zinfandel. Yeah. It is a bastard of a grape. Yeah. And I think it's why people are so passionate about it, because when you get it right, it is an infinitely greater accomplishment than doing that with other varietals. And, it's big berried, it's thin skinned, it ripens unevenly, it overproduces, it has a very unique bunch morphology. All of those things make it extremely challenging. And it doesn't mean that it's better or worse. It just means when you get it right, it took so much more effort to do that. I know when you said you've got people have a lot of following with Zin, there's a whole organization called Zin X in California. They have the Zinfandel Trail, right? Where you can go around and you trial these different Zins. And, when I think of Sonoma, one of the things that I typically would think of, like you just said, Pinot, they do some beautiful Pinots, but Dry Creek and Rockpile and Russian River Valley you guys are growing some really great Zins there. I think it's ground zero for Zinfandel, without a doubt. And I think Zinfandel was planted all over California because, when people were homesteading, and a lot of the Italians, that was what they did. That's what they did in their homeland. They grew grapes. And so as they were homesteading, they planted grapes. That's what you do. I also think that in some ways it may have been a disservice to Zinfandel because Zinfandel ended up being grown in places it probably shouldn't have been grown. And we have a better understanding of that today. But when you think about Russian River, you think about Dry Creek, you think about Rockpile, you have the ability to get it ripe, but you also are not so hot that you don't retain acid. And that's the key, back to that notion of balance. You can grow Zinfandel anywhere, you can grow Cabernet anywhere, but I think we have a better understanding of where Cabernet grows exceptionally. Yeah. Now we have a much better understanding of where Pinot Noir grows exceptionally. You want to grow it in these really cool climates. And Zinfandel, because it was everywhere, I think we're just now truly starting to hone in on what are the truly exceptional sites. Where can we make Zinfandel like this that has structure, has complexity, has balance?
You're very passionate about Zen and making wine and all of this. It's very obvious. But you're also, you mentioned in the beginning of our interviews, you're passionate about community. And we're recording this interview at our studios in Florida. And I know you've come here a lot we're in this area in Southwest Florida. We have some really big food and wine festivals. The Naples Winter Wine Fest this year, $35 million. $35 million.
Insane.
I know. And then the Southwest Florida Food and Wine Fest, I believe, was $2 or $3 million. And both of these charities are ones that give back to children. The one is strictly for the Children's Hospital, and I think they give some scholarships to pediatric students. And then the one in Naples, the $35 million, it's all for children's charities. It's education, it's healthcare, it's all of these. It's just a lot. It covers a lot. And you give to these charities, and now you've started your own pretty big deal in Sonoma, in California, called Project Zen. So Let's brag about that a little bit.
Well, first, thank you for bringing it up. And the one thing I always like to tell people when I have an audience to do that is that I truly believe that it is every human being's civic duty to give back. And we all have a different capacity to give. Fortunately, there's people out there that can give with their wallets, that buy auction lots or write checks. There's people that give with their time, which is so incredibly valuable. And there's people that, like me, that are in a position to give with their product. And thankfully, people are really passionate about wine and wine experiences. And we use that to raise money. Project Zen is a cause that is very near and dear to my heart. My oldest son was born with Down syndrome. And at the time, it was shocking. It doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of the emotional roller coaster that my family went through with that. But once my wife and I kind of came out of the fog and adjusted to our new reality, it wasn't better, it wasn't worse, it was just our new reality. But we realized that there were some huge gaps in services for families like ours in Sonoma County. I mean, Sonoma County is a relatively rural place, and we don't have a huge population base. And so I'm not criticizing it, just there wasn't logistically the way to serve families, and we wanted to give back. Fortunately, we were in a position that our son didn't need some of the tremendous medical care or surgeries or just some of the issues that come along with Down syndrome so frequently. And so we wanted to not only raise awareness but raise funds for people that need it. And I think anytime you want to stay in your lane, and we approached this nonprofit more like a business and said, we're really good at Zinfandel. Let's take Zinfandel and wrap something around it and really try and kill two birds with one stone. Can we elevate Zinfandel as an incredible wine that pairs exceptionally with food? And then can we raise money and awareness for a cause that's dear to us? So I cannot believe that we are coming up on our 14th annual Project Zen. We have to date raised almost $3 million.
Wow, that's awesome.
Through Project Zen. And all of the money goes back into our local community. We support not only our nonprofit, which we started the Down Syndrome Association of the North Bay. And then 3 years ago now, we merged with the Down Syndrome Connection of the Bay Area, which is the ultimate compliment that we created such an incredible organization that now we can serve even more families. We serve over 1,000 families in the Bay Area. But we also want to make sure that we're supporting other nonprofits in Sonoma County that are not just serving only families with Down syndrome, but serving families with any disability. And so we work with Becoming Independent, and you and I have talked about this before. Becoming Independent is like a mirror image of LARC that is here in Lee County, which I'm such a huge fan of, and we've done a lot to support them. We also support Common Ground, which is a really amazing organization that goes into schools and talks to children at the grade level about how do you interact with people that are different than you? Because differences aren't always just about, a physical or mental disability. It's about people who are a different background, different ethnicity, speak a different language, maybe someone who, was born without a leg. And so I love that we are truly making Sonoma County a better place for all people.
That's awesome. So people can come from all over now to experience Project Zen, the event. Tell us about the event. Do you have a date for 2025?
We do. It's the weekend of August 15th, 16th. And the website is projectzin.org, so projectzin.org. We have been extremely blessed that the event sells out every year. We actually have a pretty strong Florida contingent that comes out. It is, if you love food and wine, I mean, I'm biased, of course, but it is the best damn food and wine event out there. I mean, last year we had 3 different Michelin-starred chefs preparing food along with 15 other incredible restaurateurs from Sonoma and Napa and a couple from all over the country with literally the 21 best zinfandels in the world. And it's just such an awesome experience to, not only you have Single Thread, you have Charlie Palmer, you have Dustin Villette, and I know a lot of the people here know those names.
Yeah, they do.
That are pairing with Zinfandel. And you really get an appreciation of what a dynamic food wine Zinfandel can be when it's being paired by some of the best chefs in the world. And, the generosity of our wine community and our local chef community as well is just, it never ceases to amaze me. And we're able to put together some spectacular auction lots. I mean, gosh, last year, this is getting outside of wine, but we are very fortunate to be dear friends of the Van Winkle family. So,
as in Pappy.
So Pappy, Julian Van Winkle, was at the event last year. And not only did we have a bottle of every bourbon he makes to auction off, but we auctioned off a wine and bourbon dinner in his home.
Get out.
In Louisville, which is coming up next month. So we're going to redeem that. Which, I mean, that is truly a once in a lifetime opportunity.
It really is.
To dine in Pappy Van Winkle's home. And this year we have Chef Edward Lee from Louisville cooking the dinner. Last year we had Dustin Villette come out and cook the dinner. I mean, that's just the generosity of the community. And again, when you have that mindset of wanting to make the world a better place for all people, I think good things happen.
I love it. And I love anything that puts the fun in fundraising. Yeah. So you could combine a trip to Sonoma and do this event and enjoy these great Zens. And, you mentioned Charlie Palmer. You have another, we talked about Pinot earlier. You have a special project that you do with him.
I do. Charlie and I, again, I start throwing these dates out there and it makes me feel old. We have been making wine together now for 19 years.
Wow.
Which is unbelievable. And, I think sometimes the stories behind the wines are even better than the wines. And Charlie and I met in 2000 when he had opened Hotel Hillsburg in Dry Creek Kitchen. Mm-hmm. And we became friends because my family actually planted his vineyard for him out in Russian River Valley. And in 2005, Charlie invited me to go to Paris with him. And I had no idea why I was being invited, but my mom always taught me never to shoot a gift horse in the mouth.
Exactly.
So I wasn't going to ask. I just said yes as quickly as I could. And I mean, it was to this day one of the greatest, travel adventures of my life. We literally ate our way and drank our way from Paris to Burgundy and back.
Oh.
We, went to Les Paulies. We went to the Hospice de Beaune. We ate at every mom and pop restaurant you've never heard of that had the most incredible meal. And then we also ate at 1, 2, and 3-star Michelin restaurants. Rarely did we ever see a menu. And sometimes we didn't see a bill. I mean, it was just such a special experience. Wow. And I think like all great stories, they start over one too many glasses of wine.
Yeah.
And so Charlie and I, kind of hatched this plan along the way of, so what are you going to do with those grapes in your property? I don't know. Maybe we should think about making some wine. And now 19 years later, we're still making wine together. And it has just been amazing. And to have Charlie's palate lended to, this process makes for such outstanding wine. And again, a really different expression of it because it's a chef-driven wine. Yeah.
Charlie Clay's the name of the Pinot. You can find it in Charlie Palmer's restaurants. Yep. And we're about ready to run out of time here. We're in Florida. You're in Sonoma. What other states? Because we've got a global audience and people who watch this around the country. Where else can they find, besides joining the wine club, which is the best way because you get some really cool stuff. Your rosé is off the charts, but
we're for a very small brand. I mean, our winery, we only produce, I would say normally we're 9,000 cases, but we make 23 different wines. So our average production is extremely small. So we don't distribute everywhere. And we kind of follow a traditional pattern of population bases.
Okay.
So we're on the coasts. You find our wine in California, not so much in Oregon and Washington because they're very protectionist about their wines, but New York is a great market, Massachusetts, the DC area, Georgia, and then, Chicago, Texas, and a couple spots in between. So, look for our wine in great restaurants. Our wines are food wines. We have partnerships with some incredible chefs around the country. And like you said, a lot of our wines never see the light of day. So they're too small production to distribute. And so most of what we produce is sold direct to consumer through our mailing list and wine club. Yeah. So you can check that out at MauritsonWines.com.
Yeah, try it out. You make some beautiful cabs. We didn't get to talk about everything, but I think it was important to focus on Zen today. Cabs, your Sauvignon Blanc is one of my favorite in California. You've got an old vine Sauv Blanc, which is ridiculous. And then your rosés, which are amazing. So...
Well, we have some incredible grapes, and we've gotten pretty good at not screwing them up. So,
well, Clay, thank you so much for joining us. And let's go continue with this wine with a little bit of food. How about it?
Awesome. I look forward to it.
All right. Thanks again for being here.
Thanks, Gina.